Where does the Vince Wormser story begin? What was your date of birth?
April 11th, 1919, I think.
So you're coming up on a milestone birthday here in a few weeks.
Any time, the next day is a milestone.
There you go.
I got a lot wrong with me, so.
And where were you born?
Boston, Mass.
And were your early growing up years spent in that part of the country?
No, my folks were there, and then they went down to Florida for a while for something, and then Dad, they said he should get out to the West Coast where there's some more moisture. I don't know what it was, but maybe it was just not good for his health. I don't know. So I don't know much about it because I don't remember those two places. I was kind of young.
Pretty young then?
Yeah.
So your school years were out here on the West Coast?
Yeah, I had grade school was in Montlake over here, and high school was in Garfield and Roosevelt. And I had about 2 years at the U before Uncle talked to me.
You got some communication from that favorite uncle, huh?
Well, it wasn't quite that. You know, at that age, you're full of. They come and said, "You think you could pass the physical?" I said, "Oh yes." So I went and they passed it, and they say, "Well, you passed, and you have a chance to join the Air Force. Learn to fly." Okay. So I went. The first 2 days I spent down in McCord in a cell practically. I didn't know anything about it. It was kind of funny because it was. And then they said I'm supposed to go down to San Diego, and that's where the primary was at that time for primary flying.
So you did your basic training down there as well?
Yeah, primary. No, basic was at Randolph Field. That was the only biggie at the time. And from when I got through with primary, they said to go to Randolph. So I stayed there, and that was about that was a pretty long period. I forget, probably 6 months.
And where is Randolph?
In San Antonio.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a...
So you were what, about 20 at that time?
Well, yeah, something happened, yeah, because I just, in order to get my commission, you had to be 21 then, I think. So I was close to it.
So there you were, having done 2 years at the UW, and then you joined the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
And the war hadn't started yet, so
that's right.
What were you thinking your experience would be at that point?
Well, that's true, but at that time, they would come and ask you after you graduated from your deals, and they said, "What do you want to be in?" Everybody says pursuit, bombardment, and instructing. So I ended up instructing. You didn't get your choice, but they were putting you where they needed you. So then I spent about 2.5 years or so at Randolph, maybe 3 was. And at first I didn't think much about instructing, but I found out later it was quite a challenge. You get a new guy here, a new guy there, and how can you get these guys up to par that they can get a commission? So I kind of liked it. And then about then the war was starting up and and so they said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Well, I don't want to instruct. I want to get out in pursuit or bombardment. That's it."
I've already done the third, so let me get on with the first 2.
Yeah, but they didn't.
Huh.
They needed, at that time, they needed instructors pretty bad because they're putting out a lot of people.
So what kinds of planes did you actually fly as you learned to fly?
Oh, gosh, I even forget the little ones they had in San Diego. It was, we had good instructors. They were civilian instructors. And at Randolph, we had, you asked me a long time ago, flew so many of them. I can't think of the
That's
moment.
okay. Did you take to the sky like a bird? I mean, did you really enjoy flying?
Well, at first they said, you know, who wants to be an instructor? I want to be out there where the action is. And but after I got in instructing, it was a challenge. And I think the whole time I was there, over 2 years, only one guy flunked out. He couldn't make it because I worked hard. It was a challenge trying to get guys to do what they should do the way it should be done.
And was your instruction on the ground, or did you go up in the air with them?
Oh, at Randolph, you were mostly up in the air. They had, the guys that you were teaching had ground school, and then part of it was to go up and get in an airplane and see how it went. And it got to be interesting because you'd always see how you could, in the very last part of it, you get to fly for maybe a week or so of formation, which is a real thrill because you've got your nose right in there. One of the fun parts about you'd come down and the mechanics would say, it looks like your wing light's out. Say, I can't figure how that happened. It happened. So you flew good formation and just picked it down.
That close, huh?
Well, yeah, it's okay.
So the war,
I was a hot shot then.
the war broke out in 41.
And when? 40?
Well, in terms of Pearl Harbor, that's when.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But we had. They were preparing for something coming. We sure in heck didn't know what happened that really put us into it. But
So what happened then after the war began? Did you remain at Randolph the whole time?
once you're an instructor, boy, they don't let you go. And I said, well, I've been here now a couple of years. I'd like to get out and get into action. So about the beginning of the third year, they said, well, we can release a couple of you, a couple of the guys that were instructing there. And I was went to Florida, and I got, at that time, they were putting together B-17 crews. And I felt real good. I had my own airplane, my own co-pilot, my own navigator, radio man. I had a whole crew, my crew, and I felt pretty good about it. And after they got the crews organized, they went, they sent us all to Salt Lake City. That was the meeting place where they put their crews together and put in the groups and the flights and squadrons and all that. And I was there only about 2 weeks at the most, waiting for what, because I had my whole crew. I was ready to go. And they tapped me on the shoulder. One of the wheels down in the station said, "Did you ever instruct?" And I said, "Yeah, about 3 years of it." He said, "Would you believe you're going to do it again?" So he said, sent me, and we checked out in B-17s and B-24s. We had a base in Ogden, and at Ogden, they had, well, at that time, most of the crews were going over to England. And they said, we want you to check out in instrument takeoffs and instrument landings, which no one ever thought about it before. So myself and three other guys just took turns, either the 17 and 24. We'd have these combat crews that were coming in and get the captain and put him in the seat there and have him make a blind takeoff, which just involved putting well, actually, we put a 0 on the compass there, and if the guy got the 0 off a little bit, you'd have to correct him. So the guys did pretty well taking off there. We flew over out in the boonies out there in Utah to the west, and they had a field set up there with a homer. In other words, you have what they call an ADF. And as soon as you get up, you'd have these guys take off on instruments. They did pretty damn good by keeping that thing right on the center. And then you had what they call an ADF, automatic direction finder. You tune that on the radio, and that would tell you go. So the guy was told to go to that place, which he did, which was out maybe, half hour, 45 minutes. It was a homer there. When they got to that, they're still up about 3,000 feet. They were to make a procedure turn to go out this way, go out that way, go out that way, go out this way, and then you're supposed to go over this homer, and it also had a glide slope. So these new guys had to keep this thing right on center, lined up for the runway, and they also had a glide slope that you'd get on. And we had guys that did pretty damn good, because some of them would come down and they'd touch, or just about to touch, and you'd take the wheel and pull it back so it wouldn't go too hard.
Would they actually cut the engines so they were gliding?
Oh, no, when you have a gliding speed, you just keep that speed up. You didn't cut them until you got down.
And the homer, was that just a signal, or was
it was a radio station that put out a homer, and you had what you call an ADF, automatic direction finder, and if you tuned it at frequency, then this needle would say this way, so you point the airplane that way and take you out to this instrument landing deal, and they made procedures and come in and landed. And practically, not every guy, but the crews at that time were going over to England, and the weather was lousy, to put it mildly. So they wanted these guys trained in everything they could do. So I worked there for, probably over a year, shooting those guys. They would be shooting the landings, and I'd just be the check pilot in there, and be sure that he wouldn't hit too hard.
Now, when you were teaching them to fly instrument only, did you have to drape the windshield? Or
yeah, he couldn't see.
Was that blinders just on his face, or how did that work?
It was on the, I forget what was on the windshield, but it was blinding, so he couldn't see to cheat and pick his way into it. And they did real well. I thought they well. And then I was there about a year, I think, and then the guy called me. Actually, a guy was in Washington, D.C., and said, "You've been instructing a lot. We got something else you'd like to do." I said, "Well, what is it?" When I went from Florida to Salt Lake City, they just grabbed me and said, "Put your co-pilot up to captain," and said, "You are going to do this instrument work." So then they, about that time, they had other ideas in mind, and they sent us. Well, actually, I was in charge of what they call proficiency. In, I think it was 6th Air Force. We had about 5 or 6 stations, and I had another crew there I had the best bombardier, the best navigator, and all that. And we would go to each base because there was a group of people that were instructing these crews, and be sure they did it the right way or the best way and the right way to train these crews going out. And I actually ended up in charge of that thing, and that for the whole Air Force there for a while.
What an honor.
Well, yeah, you think so, but at that time, the guys were directing me around was one or two guys back in Washington, D.C. that knew of me, and they, every time something would come up, they'd grab me from that job and put me on another one. Anyhow, when I got all these bases in the U.S., only local bases, then they said, well, we're pretty well through with what you're doing, but will you go to Utah? And there's a base there. We want you to stay there for a bit. We'll have something for you. Well, that was just about the time that they were getting these, I forget the airplane now, that would fly high and could fly all the way to Africa, where am I saying? Well, where did we put that bomb down?
In Japan?
In Japan. And they had crews lined up for that thing. It was a real kind of a quiet thing. No one said anything or knew about it. We didn't even know about it. They just wanted you to be checked out in this new airplane and say, we'll tell you what you got to do. Well, the first guy went over and did a heck of a job, but they didn't pay any attention to it. The second guy went over, and as you know, that they canceled the war then, the Japs. I was the third guy, but I didn't go. Every time I get into something, I'm cut off. To take that airplane over was what a thrill those guys had. Go over there and end the war they did with that bomb.
So you would have been in the third run had it gone that far?
One more. They sent two of them. Well, there was two or three guys in there, but they only had a few, and if we were ready to do something, but they wouldn't tell us. No, that was kind of on the QT. So then after that happened, then some of these people that have been pushing me along they were in Washington, in the Air Force, called me and said, come into Washington, we want to talk with you. Well, I went in there, and of course by then the war was over, and they said, what do you want to do? You want to stay in? I said, no, I've had enough. So I actually went back home to Seattle where my parents were, and had United Airlines was hiring then. So I got on as a co-pilot on the DC-3 on United Airlines, and I flew around for maybe, about almost a year. Well, the airline business is kind of screwy because when business goes bad, like right today, United has laid off about 75 pilots from the bottom of the list. And Alaska has also done that. So they would, you just say, well, you're being furloughed, we'll call you when we need you. So I came back home, and a buddy of mine called me and said, the Atomic Energy Commission is looking for a pilot down in Albuquerque. So I drove down to Albuquerque, and I looked at the job and saw what we had to do. I don't know if you know where Los Alamos is, up in the hills up there. Our job at that time was to fly little bonanzas because that's the only plane that could go up there and land. It was a tricky deal and way up high and like that. And I did that for, probably 6 months. Also, every so often they'd have you go back to Utah, and but you would go back. It was a DC-3 then, and you'd land there and pick up this hot material from there. And we also had a guard with us too, and we'd pick up the stuff and fly it back to Albuquerque, and then we'd take little airplanes and bring it up on the hill, they called it, when they were building those big bombs. So that was kind of interesting.
So United Airlines was it pretty young then when you first flew with them?
No, they'd been around for a while, but the thing was that they had probably, you'll see the airline business today. If it goes slack for a month, they'll take the bottom guys and lay them off.
Yeah,
it's not an easy deal.
United was started as a subsidiary of Boeing, wasn't it?
No, not when I was with them. No.
Some connection early on, I guess.
Well, perhaps, but all I knew is that one day they told me to come back to come back to United, and so I told the guys down there I'm going back, and I went to Denver, went through school again, and then I got based in Portland, Oregon, which is pretty close to Seattle.
Yeah.
Which that was fine for me. And then I flew out of there for quite a while, and finally, as they increase their business, they put on a trip or two. Well, every time they put on a trip, you have to put on a new captain, a new co-pilot, and all that stuff. So I did that and finally got checked out as captain. I flew captain for quite a while with United.
Did you retire from United Airlines?
Yeah. When you get to be 60, you're no good. That's the truth.
They've extended that now, haven't they, a little
That
bit?
just is extended. They didn't do it when I was there, or I'd have stayed on, I suppose. But they've extended, and I hear, well, I was at a meeting with a bunch of United and Alaska pilots that all retired, and they're telling me that you can even fly into the 60 hours, and you can fly to, you can fly 85 hours now. They let the guys fly, and that's a lot of trips. Maybe it's only an hour from here to Portland, but when you put all together, it's a long trip. But the guys wanted it. The senior guys wanted it because the senior guys, this is their last chance to make some money, and they wanted it. The junior guys said, "Oh, why don't you quit and go out and go home so they can move up?" It was kind of and that's the way it is right now in all the airlines, that they always lay off from the bottom. Everything's seniority, and they could. Right now, the only two I know about, but a lot of them have laid off pilots. I know United has, and Alaska has.
But during the war years, Vince, you were stateside.
Yeah, well, yeah, except for one time when I was based in, I guess that was in Utah. They said, we have a crew of 21 B-17s, we got to get over to England immediately. And I said, you're in charge, you get them over there. So you can't fly with all. I think I had about, I think I had 11 or 12. So we started from there, and the first leg was to New York. And I told the navigator, everyone did their deal except the navigator, not to use the radios, because they're going to be time they not use. You're going to have to use dead reckoning and what you're trained to do. he got lost going to New York. And so I stopped and went over and talked with him. I think we had 11 crews. And I said, well, I'm going to stick with the next leg. That was up to Canada. And I'd be damned if he did get lost going up there. So I said, the next leg you're going across the ocean. You're not going to have these radio aids or anything. And I talked to him quite a while, and I got the senior guy, navigator on that base, to spend the evening with him. And I saw him next morning. How are things going? Well, I think we got it. So I was going to be with a different crew each time, be sure everything looked kosher. But I thought on this last leg, here going out crossing the ocean, if he gets lost, I don't want to see it and I don't want to hear about it. And we went head towards England, and we got a beam Iceland. We were supposed to go in there for gas, then go on to England. And I didn't say a word to him, and he didn't follow his instructions. We didn't let him use this radio compass, which is just file needle. He's supposed to know navigation, solar, and he come out there, and about the time we're supposed to be there, we're not there. So I turned on they call it ADF, Automatic Direction Finder, that points to where the station is. And at that time, it was only on a certain number of hours a day, because they didn't want the German subs and stuff to go around there. So I finally spoke to him that night. I said, listen, I said, I can't ride with you anymore. I said, you can't miss England. It's big over there and you're not far. So